Okay, we'll get down to item 18. It's the public hearing regarding the proposed maps. Do we have a staff report on that?
Yes, we do. Good evening, City Council. This public hearing is the third in the series relating to the process to transition from at-large elections to by-district elections for the City Council. Before I go further, I just want to remind City Council that Spanish translation services are available for this item and to ask our translation team to step forward to advise the audience that these services are available.
Las personas que quieran escuchar la traducción simultánea al español de esta audiencia pueden pasar a la parte de atrás y tomar un aparato receptor para escuchar la traducción. Gracias.
Thank you. This evening, we're one step closer to district-based elections. You will receive a presentation from the city's demographer, National Demographics Corporation, NDC, on the draft maps and associated sequencing. Following that, you should receive public comments. Upon closing the public hearing, we ask that you discuss the maps and potential election sequencing and provide direction on maps which may require additional analysis or revision, maps for further consideration at the next public hearing, if you would like new maps prepared, and to provide guidance on the sequencing. 12 maps have been submitted for your consideration, and NDC has prepared a potential election sequencing table related to the maps. Please review all maps, including the ones that aren't in compliance with the criteria for drawing the district boundaries, as there may be nuggets of valuable information or other considerations not included in other maps. Additionally, the agenda reports includes comment from the map submitters for your information. And just as a final reminder, the public has until May 9th at 5 p.m. to submit additional maps for your consideration at the public hearing scheduled for May 22nd, 2019. And now I'll ask Robert McIntyre from NDC to proceed with his presentation.
Hello, good evening. It's an honor to be here again with you. You're at step 3 of a minimum 4-step process. Typically, it's a 5-step for cities. In your decision or your ability to choose to move toward district-based elections. In doing so, just as a very brief reminder, you've already had 2 pre-draft hearings, so the last 2 public hearings. We discussed the criteria that are used to draw maps. Some things we talked about were the Federal Voting Rights Act and the requirement of having a roughly equal population for every council district according to the 2010 census. We talked about the idea of drawing compact and contiguous districts. We also talked about the idea of communities of interest, and some of the feedback you're going to get tonight when we talk about some of the community presented maps actually gave you some of their ideas, what they consider to be communities of interest. And as you look at different maps, a couple of them we're going to review and then say you can really only use them for their ideas around communities of interest because they don't meet the legal requirement. Out of the 12 maps, 7 of them do meet the legal requirements and can move forward, but you can use information from the other 5 maps in evaluating and giving feedback. So as community members watch the video or listen or decide they want to go draw maps before the May 9th deadline for the next meeting and produce new ones, that's still possible. One of the things you did do at the last meeting was let the community know that you're really interested in a 5 council district map with a rotating mayor. And that was a very important criteria to set out early because you prevented many of your community members from spending a very significant amount of time learning that software from 2009 only to have maps set aside because they didn't meet that requirement. So I commend you for that. So now we're very briefly going to go over the 12 maps that have been submitted, talk about some of the theory, and then I'm going to go, I'll answer any questions you have before and I can come back after, but I would suggest you take public comment and then we can continue the discussion. And if you want to give me guidance, gosh, we really like this, but could you put these 2 together or make these minor adjustments and bring back alternatives? That after the public has commented would be the best time to do that. That way you've really weighed and heard what the community says before you do that. So with further ado, we'll start with map 1 or 101 that's now up on the screen. Map 101 was created using the Excel mapping tool by community member Michael Cawley. It's a 5 council district map that does meet the contiguous requirement. And when you see Council District 3, it has what's called a point of contiguity. So it actually does meet the legal requirement, although just barely. If we zoom in, you can see what the mapper has done there. And if that was a map that the council liked, we would suggest probably grabbing a little bit of space and making that pathway through there for 3 between those other 2 council districts a little wider, just to make it a little stronger if it was ever challenged in the courts. The map has very good population deviation balance, meaning the lowest underpopulated district to the highest overpopulated district. That variance is only 2.33%, well within the maximum 10% we talked about during the first 2 meetings. It also has a maximum Latino district according to citizen voting age population of 30% in District 3. And it has a second district, the second highest Latino district is Districts 1 and 4, both at 20%, slightly below the citywide average, but still pretty good considering you got such a high number in District 3. It also has a fairly densely populated maximum Asian population according to citizen voting age population in District 1 at 13%. This particular map does pair 3 council members in District 2, and that's one of the criteria we talked about is that can be considered, not exclusively, but as part of a group of considerations. Michael Colley said that when he drew the map, he was really looking at 2 factors, population balance among the districts and compactness, and I think did a fairly nice job in doing so. So that's map 101. Now if we can move to map 102. There we go. And so map 102 was also created using the Excel tool by Bill Tabor, is a 5-district map. Unfortunately, it does not meet the contiguous requirements. So as we see, 3 is completely separated in the southern part of the town from 3 up north. And so that would violate the contiguity requirement in mapping. So that means you couldn't, while you couldn't adopt this map, there are other policy discussions to be had in looking at this. Did a really nice job with the population deviation at 6.04% and has a maximum Latino citizen voting age population of 25% in District 3 and 23% in District 2, and an Asian American population in District 1 of 14%. Mr. Tabor said that he was trying to slightly under-allocate the western part of town where new housing has gone in. And typically, that would be a criteria that we would discuss much more in depth at right after the next census. So if there's a lot of planned development coming on in 21, 22, 23, 24, if we know about that, then we might try to underpopulate those parts of town. So as new people move in, you can account for that to a certain extent. Your city is not quite big enough to go real far down that road.
Because this map will only be for the next election. Before the following election, it will be redone. Is that correct?
Correct. The maps adopted in this process will only be effective for the 2020 election. It's a great point. And one of the other notes from Mr. Tabor's notes was that really wanted to point out the way he split up the city, and so the assignments that he made are worth considering. So basically where you see where he chose kind of large streets or the division points without town, he just wanted to really point out. And he noted that, you're very fortunate that your town that each ethnicity is fairly well dispersed throughout, so you don't have an enclave of one particular group, which means you're never going to get super high numbers in one area, and that was what Mr. Tabor pointed out. There are two council members grouped in District 3, and like I said, not a legal map, but the policy implications are worth considering. Moving on to map 103. Map 103 was also created using the Excel tool that the council made available to the city and or to the citizens of the city. But I forgot to point out when I started, the city staff has done an amazing job of setting up a web page that not only contains the entire history of this process, but every presentation, every video, every map and PDF, the viewer as well. So citizens can jump in at any point during the process and catch up quite easily. So for those who are just seeing this for the first time, very easy to get on board. Jared Barton made map 103. It's a 5-district map. We have another situation where we've got a point of continuity right there. It does meet the legal requirement, just barely. Population deviation is super low at 1.68%, and the maximum Latino population in District 3 is 25%, with 23% in District 2, and a significant Asian population in District 1. At 13%. There are 2 council members paired in District 3, And when we look at Mr. Barton's comments, by the way, I think you'll probably agree that he has a pretty great sense of humor. I'm not going to read the joke, but it seems as though he really tries to create at least one district that definitely exceeds the city average for Latinos, and really pointed out that wanted to make sure that districts were compact. So compact was one of his major goals, and he says that he managed to do it without really looking at where council members live, and still only managed to pair 2 council members. So that's pretty impressive. Moving on to map 104. Also created using the Excel tool by Michael Nye. It's a 5-district map. It does meet the contiguousness requirement, just barely,
Really?
with a jump over county property. So you have a county strip of land right there where the freeway is, and so it technically meets the legal requirement. So right there. So I say just barely. If this was a map of interest, if the council liked the way that this was put together, then we would probably seek to widen that strip just a little bit, where we could get away with it while still population balancing. This particular map only had a 3.31% population deviation, so there might be an opportunity to do that. District 3 in this map had a 30% Latino citizen voting age population and a 23% in District 2. 14% in District 1 with the citizen voting age population of Asian Americans. It doesn't pair any council members, and Mr. Nye did not really give any comments as far as policy choices he made in creating that map. We'll move on to map 105.
I have one question on this. How does the continuity work with District 4 there?
Okay. So it's jumping over neighboring city land. So we don't typically recommend that, but it is allowable, mainly because it confuses citizens. So you'll see, and because you have mountainous regions, this is typically the only time in mountainous regions we see this, and we're reasonably comfortable with it as your demographer. If we were in a flat part of town and somebody tried this, we would probably urge different choices. But because you're right on the edge of a mountainous region there, and it's jumping somebody else's jurisdiction, legally it's allowable. Great question. Okay, so now we're moving on to map 105. Map 105 was also created using the Excel tool by Roy Villa. It's a 4-district map, so it doesn't meet the criteria called out during the last discussion by the council. It does meet the contiguousness requirement, although it does have a population deviation of 32.54%, so would not meet the Federal Voting Rights Act requirement. Because of that, we did not spend time analyzing the maximum Latino and Asian American areas. It does pair 2 council members in District 2, and Mr. Villa did not present comments with his map submitted.
There are a lot of people left out.
There are. So not only is it not contiguous, not population balanced, and some parts were unassigned. But perhaps examination of which roads were chosen as dividing areas might be policy implications for your consideration on a map like this. I just definitely don't want Mr. Villa to feel like it was a waste of his time to submit the map. There's definitely information to be gleaned from the map, and it may raise more conversation if Mr. Villa decides to come to the podium at some point and explain some of the choices he made. As with anybody who submitted a map, it's always helpful if they come explain the why, because then it allows you to evaluate turn their conversation into potential policy, and that's always a goal.
And residents can submit several maps, can they not?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And certainly 2 or 3 makes sense. This is not a super large city that we can divide up 50 different ways. At some point, there is kind of diminishing returns. I'd say 2 or 3 is probably a good max number. 3 would be on the high side. Occasionally, we get somebody who has an agenda, and they'll try to submit like 50 maps. But in the end, it becomes so cumbersome that it just bogs down the process, and we end up grouping them or saying, you have a bunch of these style maps, which one's the best out of this group, and will you withdraw the others? So we can really try to make this a process that moves forward rather than just doing something else. Okay, so now we're moving on to map 106. Map 106 was created using the Excel tool by Roger Sage. It's a 5-district map, but does not meet the contiguous requirement. We see District 3 is broken in the south. And we saw this happen actually on a couple maps, also map 102. And while it's not contiguous and doesn't meet the legal requirement, if adjustments could be made for population balancing, this map could be brought back into compliance and be brought back into the fold as a potentially selectable map. It does have a population deviation of 7.69%, which is within the legal limit. District 4 has a citizen voting age population grouping for Latinos of 27%. District 3 has 22%, and District 1 has a 13% Asian American population. District 2, in this case, actually groups 3 council members. And so when Mr. Sage was making this map, he talked about dividing the city into contiguous districts, taking into account visible boundaries. So balancing high and low population areas, weighting more to the high and others in the low. So most districts can be expanded to account for growth, and then says it does not gerrymander along racial lines, and I think his map bears that out. So now we'll take a look at map 107. So Nash Dingman created map 107 and was the adventurous one of the group using the online tool. So I'd like to commend Nash for attempting to do that, because it's not an easy process. It's a 5-district map, is barely contiguous, so we have some jumping over the foothills that we see there, some kind of workaround, and so when we look right there, that's where we run into the concern about continuity with District 1, and why we say barely. But this map is not for that reason that we would suggest that this map not move forward. It's actually because it potentially dilutes the Latino population. But that jump between 2 and 3 for Area 1, just to the north there, is the primary concern with this particular map. District 3 does have a citizen voting age population of 25% Latino. Area 2 has 23% and 14% Asian American in District 1. District 1 pairs 2 council members, and District 3 also pairs 2 council members. And there was a bit of concern in the way this map was created around dilution, not so much in Council District 3, but in 2, 3, and 4. Mr. Nash actually said that his goal, he said he intentionally gerrymandered districts, but he's not using the right term. Actually, he very intentionally identified a community of interest around socioeconomics, income. And in doing so, sought to group one area with the highest socioeconomic, and then in Area 1, Area 4 with the lowest. Areas 2 and 3 capture the upper middle percentage. Area 5 captures the lower middle percentage. 3 was pushed across Los Posas to allow 1 to capture Mission Oaks, Oak Canyon, Santa Rosa area, while remaining contiguous. The 2-3 border was thrown together to make it fit, which is sometimes what we have to do when we're mapping, and the 4-5 border was also thrown together southeast of Santa Rosa. And so there's definitely some community of interest conversation. There's also some choices around boundaries worth noting and discussing. Moving on to map 109. Map 109 is a PDF map, which was basically the paper-drawn map. Pardon? Oh, I'm sorry, did I skip 108? 108, let's go back to 108, which was also a paper-drawn map by Anonymous. It's a 4-district map, which does not meet the council's requirement. It has a population deviation of 127% and pairs council members, 2 of them in District 2 and 2 in District 3. This would be very much what we'd call kind of a regional map. And certainly you can see where some dividing lines are, and that may or may not play into your consideration, your conversation. So the communities of interest are actually listed in the submission notes. 1 using the older communities, so Leisure Village, natural disasters and development concerns. 2, Village at the Park, Mission Oaks, La Mariposa, Boys and Girls Club. And so this is in your packet on which areas they felt like they were trying to group together. Boys and Girls Club, schools, family-friendly student transit. 3, using the criteria of economic development, Old Town, outlets, conference center, apartments, considerations of traffic, ranch house. 4, heights, wealth area, Spanish Hills, Spring Hill Library, RCHS. And so here, while the map was drawn with 4 districts, certainly gives you ideas of pairings of communities of interest in their notes. Now moving on to map 109, please. Exactly. Map 109 was created using the paper PDF map submitted by Anonymous and has 5 council districts. It is contiguous. It has a population deviation of 8.91%, and District 2 has a citizen voting age population of Latinos at 27%, and District 3 at 24%. District 1 in the west has an Asian American population, citizen voting age population of 13%. Map submitter 109 did not include comments in their map submission, and none of the districts pair current council members, so they kind of honor the will of the citizenry in the last election. Map 110, 111, and 112 were created by National Demographics, and the goal of these maps was not to outdo or better anybody else. It was really to round out your set of options or try to allow for a kind of more rounded discussion, both in public comments and hopefully by the council. And so looking at map 110, it's a 5-district map, contiguous, has a population deviation of 4.35%. We do achieve a 29% Latino citizen voting age population in District 3 and 22% in District 2. I noticed there was an error in my chart on this map and the next one. I'll make sure to update the chart that has the percentages that summarize these for you. And then an Asian American population in District 1 of 13%. No council members are paired in 110. 110 is really what we consider to be a slightly more compact version of 109. Where the districts are clearly aligned with regions of the city, 1 using the north and northwest, 2 looking at the central and southwest, 3 very central district, 4 in the northeast, and 5 in the southeast. Map 111, is also written by NDC, or created by NDC, has a 5 council districts. It is contiguous with a population deviation of 2.66%. Council District 5 in this case. Oh, that's very vivid. Council District 5 in this case has 26% citizen voting age population of Latinos. Council District 2 has 23%, and Council District 1 has 14% Asian American. No council members appeared in this map. And this is roughly, this is what we'd call like a horizontal map or a sandwich map, where we kind of take longer breadths of your community. And the goal of a map like this is to grab very various socioeconomic or community groups and pair them in a different way or provide a different set of options. You may or may not like that. Sometimes we learn just as much about buy what you hate as what you love. And so both parts of that conversation are equally valid. We did look at the pick up large shares of the population from both east and west of the railroads in each of these. So when we look at District 5, District 3, District 2, and where they fall around the railroad tracks, we made choices with that in mind. So now we're moving on to map 112. Map 112 is the final NDC map, has 5 council districts and does meet the continuity requirement, a 3% population deviation. District 3 has a 28% citizen voting age Latino population, while District 2 has a 22%, and District 1 has a 13% Asian American population. No council members are paired. What we really tried to do with this was create a central district. Each district, East District 5 spanning the railroad, and the Southern District 3 spanning the railroad. So not quite as flat as the last choice. The east end of the city is entirely in District 4, while the freeway is a major division east-west. So with that, I would suggest that if there are no technical questions before you hear public comment, that we take public comment, and then I can come back up and answer any questions or help facilitate your discussion.
Any questions at this time? Okay. Mike Mitchner.
Yes, good evening, Mike Mishler. You all know me. I don't know you. Glad to be here tonight. I'm just giving you a heads up. I'm working on some maps at home with the software package. I have a couple I'm playing around with. They'll be submitted within the time frame here to get into the city. And I'm giving you a heads up because the first thing is when you look at my maps, they're going to be a little bit different than what you're seeing up here. And I wasn't smoking anything when you see these maps. So I'm just giving you a heads up. They were actually done on purpose. I'm basically going to be following what the contractor put in for 111. Mine's going to be a 111 map, which is the layering on steroids. It's really going to be breaking up the city. The intent, let me back up real quick. The main advantage I see in districts is to have incumbents be challenged easily. You know, it's easy to challenge an incumbent with a district instead of going to all the doors and all the houses across the city. You have a smaller area. One of the problems we have is Leisure Village, where you can't campaign door to door. So one of the things I'm going to be looking at in my maps is breaking up Leisure Village into 2 or more sections, because whoever has Leisure Village and Camarillo Springs together will have that incumbent will have a good hard seat that'd be very difficult for someone coming in to campaign against. So that's one of the goals I'm going to have. The other thing I'm working on, one of the big disadvantages of going to districts, though, is that when you break them up into home areas, and most of these maps have these little neighborhood areas, the city of San Diego has a big problem with doing that method, because what happens, I'm not saying any of you are going to do this, but down the road, future council potentially members, what happens when an issue comes up, if it's in one area, usually that council member is the lead person who investigates and comes up with a recommendation. And in the city of San Diego, the other districts all kind of go along with that one lead district, and because they all want to be the lead person in their own district, and so that's a problem. So what I'm going to be doing is splitting up the city. We also have issues with the railroad track going east, like was mentioned, because there's traffic issues east of the railroad. We also have issues with the creek, Calicos Creek coming through there. The city has a water on the west side, as you know. Everything east is Camarosa Water District. People in Mission Oaks don't care what's happening with the city water and the city sewer and stuff, because that's a different water district, and they have different issues. But my intent will be to divide up layers across the whole thing, and so that every council member will be near an issue that comes up, so that wherever the issue pops up, there would be council members in and around it that would be actively involved, and trying to move forward with that. So I'm just giving you a heads up. Thank you.
Barbara Williams.
We should not be in this situation, and I blame Mr. Pirrick, Mr. Tremblay, Mr. Kildee, and Mrs. Craven. Had you invoked the safe harbor clause of the CVRA, then legal fees would have been limited to $30,000. Other cities in Ventura County were able to figure this out. I don't know why you didn't. If you had, the city could have afforded to fight this. Any judge would have seen that the reasons given in the letter had no basis, and it was just a shakedown using a loophole in the CVRA. I looked at the maps and was very concerned to see that the contractor developed maps did not have any city council members paired. That was information that the public didn't have necessarily available to make their maps, and I think that's as unfair. But I also got to thinking, I do not remember hearing the ground rules for the election next year. So, is it set in concrete that Charlotte, Sean, and Susan will remain on the council until 2022, since they were elected for 4-year terms before the district's idea came in play? If so, does that mean only 2 districts vote next year? And what happens if Charlotte, Sean, or Susan are in the same district? How does that affect the election if the council chooses a configuration like that? Is there a ground rule that Charlotte, Susan, and Sean must be in separate districts, since they should not be up for re-election in 2022? And is there a ground rule that Kevin and Tony will be in their own districts so they can run for re-election? So, you know, it becomes very disconcerting based on certain people have information and others don't. So who's providing guidance to the demographer? And obviously they know where each council member lives, because that's how they drafted their maps. Is there a ground rule to ensure at least one of the districts has a significant number of Hispanics? And those seem to be the numbers that were brought out as being important in the maps that were made. Is there going to be an investigation of voter registrations to ensure all those registered within the city limits are citizens and of legal voting age? It's already been made public that some people under 18 got registered, and also there were some registered through the DMV system that are non-citizens. So I don't have proof of all my speculations, but I think everyone needs to go on record of what is being used as guidance in developing maps by everybody. And well, and it's obvious that demographers are not really working independently. So I think there needs to be more training on using the tools before the May 9th deadline. And an online tutorial is not acceptable. There needs to be some in-person training. So again, the previous city council failed to protect our city and our voting rights when they let the 45 days pass without action. And your excuses didn't cut it with me and a lot of people.
Matt Lorimer.
Good evening, City Council and people at home. So I do have some questions here because these are going to come up. Signing policy. Are we going to be, if you run for City Council, are you going to allow people to keep the same, they can put them all over the city because they may still buy gas and food? Or is there going to be some kind of committee that changes that? Signatures, when you need signatures to run for City Council, are you going to allow people outside the district? Because they are hard to get a hold of. Let me remind you, some of the signatures required, you need to go to supermarket. The way this is divided up, some people would not be able to use a supermarket. So those are very valid questions. How would you get your signatures if you're not near a supermarket and you weren't in that district? Another thing I think we need to know. A lot of people are turning maps here. This could be a power structure for either Republicans or Democrats or another party. All these maps, there should be a breakdown of Republicans, Democrats, and what the party officials are, because here's the thing. You could draw maps here and actually have leverage over power. Another big difference when we're talking about these lines here, we have a newer part of the city, and we're now, the way these lines are drawn, we have older parts. Well, you by know infrastructure is going to fail based on older sections. So if you take a map and you draw a map up and you divide up newer sections versus older sections, are you going to cause problems? Because you well know that if you have 3 districts and they live in older sections, they're going to need twice as much money to repair the roads or infrastructure than the newer sections. So the newer sections may see less money if they have requirements. So those are very valid points. Nobody's talked about packing or cracking. I'm not going to go into it. I don't have time, but you should read up on that. Gerrymandering. You know, these are very valid points because lines are being drawn. We don't know who's coming up with these lines. I mean, we know they're citizens, but you got to be very careful that we don't create a power vacuum here because we're hooking up one party or another. But again, I think these are all valid points that should be addressed. I haven't heard anybody talk about these because we're all worried about the map. Hey, who's in my district? Who's that district? But the point is, you do have some serious issues that need to be addressed. I hope you will address some of my concerns and some other people, because I have had people come up to me and talk to me about this, and those are valid concerns. Thank you.
Anyone else like to address the council on this? I'll ask the demographer to come back up then, and
We close the public hearing.
I will close the public hearing.
Oh, there wasn't.
Hello. I can definitely, would you like me to provide some clarifications on some of the questions that came up, or would you like to start conversation?
You can provide some clarification.
Okay. So packing and cracking. We talked about the citizen voting age population for protected class voters, and in fact, we spent a lot of the time presenting talking about which districts had the highest possible ability to put the most Latinos in a district, and we saw we ranged from mid-20s up to about 30. in one district, and the next district we'd typically get from 20 to 25, and the rest would fall a little shorter than the city average, which they'd have to balance out to 23% for Latinos, citizen voting age population. So the idea of packing, where you've got areas where if I could get over 50%, but I could also get upwards of 70 or 80%, and I just put most Latinos, for example, in this case, in one district rather than spreading them across two where they could influence elections in two, that would be packing. The opposite of that is called dilution or cracking, and the idea that I'm trying to draw lines that really thin out the numbers and keep it as close to that 23 average as possible to minimize the voting impact of protected class voters. And so we did spend a fair bit of time talking about the protected class voters in your communities, specifically Asian Americans and Latinos, as we presented the maps. There's a little bit of discussion around gerrymandering. During the first two presentations, we talked about the types of gerrymandering, ratio being the one spelled out in the Federal Voting Rights Act. There was no attempt, and I have to say, people will use the term gerrymandering, and what it means in common terms is any map I don't like. So when you hear about it at the store, it's very rarely talking about racial gerrymandering as per the Federal Voting Rights Act from the 60s. It's more talking about, I think you saved your seat and I don't like it. The federal and state courts have upheld the idea that it's perfectly within your purview to consider incumbency, meaning not to draw yourself out of a seat. The citizens, the electorate put you in your seat, and it should probably be they, to the extent possible, that decide whether or not you've earned to keep it or not. And so that should happen at the next election. None of your terms will be cut short by this process. By the very nature of the law, that's not allowable. Older versus newer, that's actually a pretty good policy conversation. Certainly where you've got new developments, new infrastructure, you're probably not going to spend as much money out of the budget on that, and that's a good policy conversation to have. Great point there. We did not produce or include or use in our maps any voting habits, so whether you're or party affiliation in drawing the maps, we didn't provide the information for that. Is that obtainable? Can somebody go get that? Absolutely. But we are not providing that as a resource for this process because this was not brought out publicly as a left-right Republican Democrat process. There's been no attempt in drawing districts that I've seen in and out evaluating what's been submitted or in NDC's maps to try to pack one party or the another for each council member because we didn't use that data in doing so.
And they're nonpartisan elections.
Right, but we didn't pull voter self-identification data and try to see which areas have higher amounts and see how that might fit your leanings. There was no effort to do any of that, and I just want to be very clear with that. Because that is not an uncommon innuendo. Regarding elections and process to run, if you were to try to get onto the ballot for a seat, you would need to get signatures from within your district. So it doesn't mean you can't go to the grocery store. It just means you have to ask, do you live in this area before you ask them to sign the sheet, which does not make it easier, especially if you don't have a grocery store in your district. But it's certainly a concern if anybody wants to run. Okay, so there's that. So we talked about incumbency. Whether or not you consider that in the final map selection is up to you, but it is one of the possible choices, just like communities of interest. So one of your community members talked about socioeconomics and talked about pairing different housing tracts together. Those ideas are all around communities of interest, and those are just as valid as the idea of incumbency under the eyes of the law, and they have been fully adjudicated in the courts. You have no legal threat there. Terms won't be changed. So sequencing. This is a very difficult conversation, and I typically try to ask councils to wait until they've narrowed down their map sets to talk about sequencing. Because it is possible to have sequencing where you prevent somebody from running. So if I'm a 2020 seat and my district is voted on by the council to be scheduled in 2022, at the end of 2020 my seat's up and I can't run for 2 years. That's possible. That happens. We try to advise as a matter of policy against that. But in the end, the council will make the decisions on what districts come up on which election. It just can't be done in a way that shortens anybody's seat. So, for example, the 2 council members that will be up at the next election will be running for their district seat while the remaining council members stay at large for till the end of their term in 2020. Then they will run for a council district seat in 2020 on the next version of the map.
Be 2022.
2022, I'm sorry, yes. So 2020 will be the first set. They will go, those council members will go from at large to their districts, while the other 2 remain at large. Then in 2022, the final 2 council members, or the final 3, will go to districts from at large seats. So we just try not to get too far down that rabbit hole until we've narrowed down our map choices, because we could be talking about hundreds of options. So once we get down to 2 or 3 choices, that really kind of helps us talk through the much more finite set of choices. So I think I've covered the open questions that came up through
Okay,
public
so
comments.
now we'll get comments from, any comments or questions we would have for either
Absolutely.
you and or staff?
Absolutely.
Okay, are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Tremblay?
But stay with that hypothetical, because in 2022, there actually would be new maps. So you could have redrawn or revised districts even within the 2 council members, assuming that hypothetical, elected in 2020, who would now actually be in slightly different districts.
Absolutely. But their term cannot be ended early.
Got it. Thanks.
Any other questions? No? Okay, so what would be the procedure now then? I don't believe we have any more questions of you or staff that I'm aware of, so. how
Any
would we
conversation that the council is willing to have about what they like or dislike about certain maps, or if there was a map that, gosh, got really close to something I think I might be interested in, or a couple of council members might be interested in, with just these 1 or 2 little changes, this would be a great time to hear it, because we can bring those changes back to the next meeting as a 101A alternative, or for example. So if there is a conversation to be had, now would be the time. You don't have to. You can wait till you get some more new maps, and we do this again. You really have 12 policy maps to look at, but only 7 can move forward from a possible adoption perspective. So you don't have to, but you can discuss if you're interested.
And we still have future meetings that maps
1.
very well could be submitted that have not been submitted up to this point.
Correct. And I would definitely look for direction from the council to remove maps 102, 105, 106, 107, and 108 from consideration as adoptable.
I'm sorry, 102, 10,
5, 106, 107, and 108. In one criteria or another, they didn't meet the criteria laid out by the council as far as what they're looking for adoptable maps. Some have legal challenge concerns. And so we would suggest that we move forward with the remaining 7 maps. Doesn't take them out these 5 maps out of your ability to look at them, look at policy conversations and discussions. It just means you're not moving them forward for potential adoption.
Okay, we do have, before you go, we do have a question, Mr. Tremblay.
Just as a follow-up, I understand that with respect to 102, 105, 106, 108, are you recommending deleting 107 from consideration because of the concern on the dilution of the Latino population? That's what I thought I heard you say, but I want to make sure
the jump
and
on
the concern about defensibility.
Yes, so each of these, some are for district, which didn't meet the criteria you laid out.
Right.
The other 2 have a continuity issue, and then those 2 being 102 and 106. 105 and 108 have 4 districts, and 107 has both a concern around dilution and around the way Area 1 jumps right up by where 2 and 3 come together.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions?
The council is within your purview if you'd like to narrow down more, because any narrowing you do will be a signal to anybody drawing maps. So, for example, you heard from, I think it was Mr. Misher. I may have written his name down incorrectly, but he spoke about his drawing a map close to 111 on steroids. Certainly anything you do that narrows this down may provide guidance for anybody who does want to draw future maps, because they'll really be honing in on the policy conversation you're having. Not obligated to do so, but it is an option for you.
Okay. All right, so council, do we want to address any of these issues that have been brought up and/or start the discussion on this process here?
I'll start it. Frankly, I like map 109. I mean, I think it looks like it has areas that would be easy for one person to represent. I understand the idea of layering, as Mr. Mishler said, but if you look at, I think it was 107, which we've taken out because it wasn't contiguous or was questionable. It really seems to me that a map that's like this, that has something that goes completely across the bottom and then all the way across the top, even if it were, shall we say, thicker at one point, maybe followed Las Posas or something, that it would be hard for one, if you're trying to get something compact where one person represents a group of people, it just seems to me that if they're geographically close, it's easier to represent them. Easier for them to call you to get out there and talk. And I understand Camarillo isn't a big city, and we're representing everything now. But if you're going to make it smaller, I think it should be so that the people feel each district feel connected in some way. And even though 107 was supposedly designed with socioeconomics in mind, I don't think that the people up in Spanish Hills feel any way connected to the people over adjacent to Santa Rosa Road. So I like 109. I like it better than, and it was an anonymous one. I like it better than, say, 110 that was drawn by the consultant. That's 109. Each area is fairly compact and arranged kind of by neighborhoods, although that people might pick a hole with that adjective I use, but I don't know another word to use for it. 110, I think, again, has the ones on the right grouped together, and then you've got the two on the west kind of sprawling throughout town, and that somehow in my mind it doesn't make sense to me. So those are my comments on those. We're also considering 101, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
101, I didn't realize so much of the population was concentrated in that 2 and 3 area, that the other areas would be so large, especially with all of the construction that's coming online in the next year out in the west. I just didn't look population-wise balanced to me, but I guess maybe it is. We're not doing 104, 105, 106, 107, and 108, is that right?
101, 103, 104, 109.
Oh, we're considering 104. I wrote that down wrong then.
Was the table included by staff? Was the table included in the packet? The table was the table included in the packet that had kind of a summary of all three. So what we did was we divide on the top the ones that we suggest moving forward and the ones on the bottom for discussion but that would not move forward. We'll make sure this is included in the next packet because sometimes it helps.
Was it in here? I didn't see it. Oh,
Okay. It's a tool I use because it makes for a great speaking tool, but we can certainly include it, especially since you have more than 10 maps. It makes it easier to look at so many. So 103 would be the next one. You just discussed 101.
my comment's the same. I just didn't realize that that number 2 and 3 area were so densely populated. I'm not visualizing where all the population is compared to the other geographic areas. I mean, and it seems that area number 4 kind of goes out of its way to leave a peninsula there in the middle.
Pretty common population balancing tool. You either have to pick a north half, a south half, or go up a middle, and so
It just seems like number 5 is stuck right there in the middle of number 4.
Sure.
Which I'm looking at it as not a council member representing these necessarily, but a person who is going to say, oh, I want to talk to my city council member who represents me, and you're on one side of one of these streets and somebody else is on the other side, and you have two different members. And I know that'd be all over, but this just seems like it's really a weird way to divide up numbers 4 and 5 to me.
And so if I could point out one benefit of the tool, which this is available from your districting website on your city's page, is any member of your community can put in their address on each map and see exactly where they live. So if they're close to a line, they can put in their address and zoom in and know for sure for each one of the mapping choices there, which might be helpful for discussion when you're at the supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I already said, I think I got through, we're not discussing 5, 6, 7, and 8. Is that correct?
That is correct.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Well, you can discuss.
We can
if there were
discuss them, but
policy
we're
issues
not
that
considering them as presented.
We're not
for various
they couldn't
reasons.
Be adopted.
They couldn't
but
be
you
adopted.
can discuss any policy implications or notes that you liked or disliked in their creation.
So that got me to 9. I've already said I like 9. I don't like 10 as well. And, I didn't like 11 as well because of the... So I'm going to let somebody else talk. I've given you mine.
Ms. Santangelo?
So first I wanted to start out by saying that I believe all our addresses are public record. So if you want to map out where we live in relation to the districts, you can go ahead and do that. I also want to just speak personally to the idea of grouping incumbents in the districts. And it probably sounds as if each one of us is biased if we say that we don't want to pair people up in a district. And you can think that. I really agree with the way you put it, that I believe that if you were elected, then you ought to be able to run again and let the people decide if they want to re-elect you. And that's my basis for wanting to, as much as possible, try to keep us out of the same districts. So that being said, I'm just going to quickly go through, because I know there's a few more of us to talk. So I do like MAP 101, but it does put 3 council members in one district, and I see that as a real problem. I also think about, I know we have to look at the density of population, but District 1 is huge.
Yeah.
And, in terms of campaigning, that could be a disadvantage. 103, I don't know why. It seems, it's not as compact as I'd like it to be. I don't know why I'm drawn to maps that are more compact, which I think is what Mrs. Craven was alluding to as well.
You do or do not like 103?
Not really.
Okay.
104, I know that you said like that peninsula-ing, is that a word, is normal in districting, but it just seems very odd to me. In my mind, I want the districts to make sense somehow, and this one doesn't. I also like 109 very much, and right now 109 would be my first choice. I think it makes sense geographically. I think it uses some natural boundaries. I think it's fairly compact. It makes sense to me. And I also like the way the Latino population works out, and the Asian population. What was 110?
That sprawling top district.
Yeah, 110 would probably be my second choice. I think with map 111, I think I have to get used to, and I'm going to try to do this before Mr. Mishler's maps come in, with the horizontal. I think I just have to kind of let that sink in a little bit more, because I guess I'm looking for, that compactness. But I can see the points he raised, and I can see why this also can work. So those are my thoughts where I am right now.
112, do you have a thought on 112?
That's the, I'm okay with that one. I like that one.
Okay.
Not as much. I think, 109 is my first choice.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else like to go? Anybody else ready? Sean, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll make some general comments. But one of the things I'm looking for, I want something that seems natural. The other two council members have already kind of spoken to this, but something that seems natural and intuitive to the voter, that they can easily identify their district and who the representative is, and it just, by looking at the map, it kind of just, it makes sense. So yeah, something simple. There was something that Mrs. Craven brought up pretty early on, and that was the idea that as many districts touch the 101 freeway, because that is a pain point in our community, rightly so, and it's a pain that maybe each of us should share in. And I
didn't choose that map.
Yeah, but I generally like that concept. Not grouping, I personally want to stay away from having a district that is almost wholly south of the 101. I don't want this north and south thing to go on. If we can have 3 or 4 districts jump the 101, and we can try to represent both the north and the south, all the better. I can hear Game of Thrones references being thrown about right now in my head. An observation in looking at all these maps, we up here spoke about how we felt like Lewis and the railroad track was kind of a natural divider, and it was really surprising in that a lot of people, to my surprise too, because I completely agree with that, but a lot of people jumped that, what we thought was kind of a natural divide. Every single map to varying degrees, but a lot, considerably more than what I thought they naturally would. So I think that was just kind of an observation as to maybe what other people are thinking. In regards to maps, I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of what my colleagues have already said. I like certain elements of 101. I like the general thoughts of 101, 109, 110 particularly. I'm not really committed to any one particular thing right now. I'm really interested to see what Mike's map on steroids looks like, and whatever other kind of creative approaches that residents take. By all means, I don't necessarily want to put too many limits some people's creativity and their thought process behind the maps. So I'm a little hesitant to really say this is what I want, because I probably don't honestly really know what I want until I really see it and we have further discussion and more maps come in.
Well, definitely that would be premature. One of the things I'm trying to see if there's a consensus around any that we're just not feeling. And that doesn't make a map good or bad,
Right.
It just from a policy perspective. So, certainly you expressed your desire to move forward with 101, 109, 110. We've had less than favorable comments around 103 and 104. If you agree, then now we have a majority of the council that, not saying those maps are in any way invalid or bad, they just don't meet some of the policy considerations that you're looking at. And that's a way to help kind of whittle this down as well. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to say somebody not liking the map is a bad thing. It helps facilitate the process, and it's not a slight on any creator's effort.
Yeah. I do echo Ms. Craven's sentiment and like saying, in referencing map 107, albeit very creative, I agree that the people in Spanish Hills probably don't have the same things in common or issues in common with the people who live far end of Mission Oaks. To where the maps don't look, and I'm going to use the term because everyone else is using it, and that's what we all know, but gerrymandered. I know it's incorrect, but that's the term everyone has kind of applied to it. But something that looks a little bit more natural and, like I said, intuitive.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, would you like me?
First of all, I think we need to narrow down the maps tonight, but I am looking forward to hearing and receiving some additional maps. I know in addition to Mr. Mishler, I think there's at least one other community member who intends to submit maps. I'm looking forward to seeing those, and from anybody else. So I want to narrow us down because I think that's the best thing to do, but I don't want to preclude anything from May for our May meeting. Sequencing, well, I'll get to sequencing because we're not there yet. I don't want to digress. With regard to how I looked at it, I really, aside from the three mandatory criteria which are a given, and right now I'm on the staff report on page A2, I focused on the optional criteria, and I certainly agree with Ms. Santangelo and Ms. Craven's and Mr. Milche's comments, particularly Ms. Santangelo, regarding the pairing issue. But I also looked, and I really tried to adhere to geography, cohesiveness, and compactness of territory, as well as and it's subjective, what the communities of interest are within specific districts. And sometimes you get to communities of interest by looking at compactness, and sometimes not, but it's a helpful tool. So for those, and I also keep in mind too that communities of interest, there are several factors, including who receives water service from who. There is a certain portion of town that receives water from the city of Camarillo, and a certain portion of town that receives water from Camarosa. And that's something that we have to, in my opinion, keep in mind. Sean phrased it right. I like, but I'm not saying. But there are certain ones that I feel a preference for. I feel a preference for, or at least inclined toward, without selecting, 109 and 110. 104 to me is really interesting, and I'm not quite sure where I come down on that yet. But 104, I think it does leave. I think Ms. Craven said it leaves a peninsula. At least that's a comment that I wrote down. And I also think, as Susan indicated, with no disparagement of the author, I'm struggling with district number 1 because it just doesn't make a lot logical. Well, but I'm trying to say it in a way that doesn't disparage the framer of the map. But I have some difficulty with that. So I'm sort of looking at 104 with interest. I don't think I would favor or prefer 101, 103, 111, or 112. Principally, those preferences have to do with optional criteria numbers 2, 3, and 4, as I articulated before I set out on my numbers. Okay, so that's where I am.
It's very helpful.
All right. Well, I kind of looked at this from, I think, the future of, I could be wrong on this, but I think the future of the elections with the districting is going to be, are you able to walk your district? And with that criteria, among other criteria that I looked at, my feeling is that the districts that you can explain to constituents the easiest are going to be something that we might want to strongly consider. So I look at the compaction there. So as I looked at that, it would appear to me that map 109, 109, and 110 are that. The first one, 101, I understand what they were trying to do, but I just think that geographically that's going to be a challenge, and I think a lot of it kind of spills over from Union Pacific over to the westerly and too. I'd like to see that a little bit more compact with the east and the west here, because I think it is important, as was brought up, that there's a separate water district there, and there's some unique attributes to eastern Camarillo here. 102 wasn't.
Could we ask?
The Peninsula 105, I think that's been discussed here. That would be. So from what's been said, I think that, you know, my thoughts are, as of right now, knowing that there more than likely will be other maps submitted, the 109 and 110. Is that helpful here?
It is.
Yes.
And so what I'm saying is I didn't hear anybody passionate about 103. That might be one we could look at. We have mixed reviews on 101. 104, we have one person that's warm on it, but kind of open. 109 seems fairly popular. 110 fairly popular. 111, I think it only seemed like we had one person that was warm about it, and 112 we only had one person warm on it, unless I missed.
I think we had a comment from Mr. Tremblay.
Well, I had a comment, and I don't think I'm passionate about it, but I do think that, trying to decide what adjective I want to use, but anyway, I had some issues with 103 because I didn't think it addressed communities of interest as well as some others. So it's, without being passionate about it, but it's something that I would be skeptical about supporting.
And so if there's generally, 4 out of 5 are just not really warming up to a particular map, that is a good criteria, because once you've met the legal requirements and you start talking about can somebody walk it, well, that is definitely a primary concern of the Voting Rights Act, is can somebody challenge a seat? So these are great policy conversations you're having. When you get down into the traditional criteria, when you start balancing some of the other criteria, communities of interest, well, that becomes a little more subjective, and no matter what you say, somebody's going to have an argument. But it is your choice to make at that point.
You follow? Yeah.
I have one other. Oh, sorry. No.
Was that okay? I don't know if we've really addressed this question, but, and this is actually for both you and for Mr. Pierick, but does it make a difference relative to the criteria where you've got, there is a large area of town. So, for example, in 109 and at least in 109, there are certain areas of the city where you cannot walk. You can't get into those developments. So Leisure Village, you cannot walk as you would traditionally do. And I had one candidate at the last election, not mine, but be very vocal about saying this isn't right. And I think there are certain areas, and Barbara can certainly correct me if I go wrong, as I usually do. There may be areas of Camarillo Springs where you can't walk either.
That's correct.
And so,
They don't allow any kind of solicitation or door-to-door development.
so does that make a difference judicially or from a defensibility standpoint? on adoption of maps?
As far as I know, it does not, and because, there's, for example, if you were looking at this to pick a map, 109, I mean, that one that's got Leisure Village in one district and Camp Springs in another. So I am not aware of any law that would provide that the walkability is, criteria for a particular to select one map over another. But I've made a note of it, and I'll certainly look into it and can come back to you at your meeting on May 22nd to let you know for sure if that is something that can be considered or not.
So I can add to that just a little. Part of the reason you have a list of traditional criteria is because no individual criteria will stand on its own. Within every community, I can poke holes at any one of those criteria throughout an entire community. So what you do is create a list, and you as a council, you as a community are trying to balance that list for the best possible outcome. But each individual criteria is short from equal population according to the 2010 census and don't crack or pack dilution. Essentially, the traditional criteria are a balance. They're not perfect individually.
Follow-up. As I said, one of the candidates in the last election talked to me about it and was really concerned about that. And I guess if you, on the one hand, what happens when you have that situation is by going to districts, it actually exacerbates that problem. No, exacerbates that challenge for candidates who are running in that district versus having it large. But I also understand the countervailing argument, which is whoever is running in that district has the same challenge. Multiple candidates have that same challenge. So, but I think what I want to pose it to you is I want to pose it to you from a voting rights standpoint. My gut is telling me that there is not a defensibility issue on it, but I'd certainly be interested in knowing. And I hasten to add, it's not because I'm complaining about it, because I know where I live, I know where I'm situated, but I'm just curious about that. So, thanks.
From a selection perspective, it's not a concern.
Okay.
Unless council comes up with something that we have yet to come across.
Well, it's happened before, but we'll see. I will look into it and have an answer for certain at your next meeting.
Yeah.
Ms. Craven?
I'm sorry, I have two other comments, and one is that I think in every district there are places, they're not as well-known maybe as Camarillo Springs and Leisure Village as not being able to get in, but many of the apartment buildings do not allow people in. There are gated communities in many other parts of town that are smaller. So I think that kind of a problem is in a challenge. It isn't a problem. I mean, I had a low-budget campaign, but I sent letters to those people. But at any rate, the other comment I wanted to say is, for people who are going to be drawing maps, could you put either 101 or 103 up, please? The big problem I have with this is that little triangle down in the middle, and other maps had that too. And that's separated by Lewis Road. It's down there by itself. I don't see anything that would make those people think they should be in that top. I'm looking at a different map. I have it as number 2. It's number 3 up there on the screen. But I just, it's in the idea of compactness, and I think that somebody went down there, or several people went down and picked up that little triangle so that they could get the numbers. That triangle is going to be very, very populated within the next, that's the 3M site, it looks like to me, within the next couple of, by the end of the year, I'm sure people will be in those apartments.
Currently, there's 0 voting population in that triangle.
But isn't that where there's a lot under construction?
If you select the layers and scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the census population.
Well, I'm just looking at how many places are being built there right now. If it's where I think it is.
Mr. Clifford? If you click on the layers and scroll down, up on the layers tab, up top, right there, and scroll down, you'll see the census population right there. And if we zoom into that triangle down at the bottom, we'll actually be able to see the population numbers within each of those areas. No, yeah, there we go. So
Right there, that's
so
the
we see
triangle.
that there's zero population currently in those triangle areas.
But I'm saying by the end of the year, there are going to be a lot of people. Isn't that where they're building?
Yeah.
Oh, that triangle is on the
other side.
West side of Lewis.
west side of Lewis. Okay, I was mistaken. I'm sorry.
And so we could be instructed to move that into one of the west or east adjoining.
If there's nobody there. I just have a problem with putting a little triangle of anything off by itself that wouldn't make any sense.
But if it's all commercial, then you would never have any voters in that area. And I think it is largely.
Then why can't it go in one of the others?
I wonder if it was an oversight because it was zero.
If it doesn't have anybody, it could be in either one of those others.
Okay.
Anyway, that was the point I was trying to make.
All right,
So
so
would there be a policy conversation between putting it in one or four, one over the other?
No?
no.
We know the law, but we'll never know the heart and soul of your community like you do. That's part of why we do this process.
It does. I think it does too.
If it's on the west side of Dawson? Is that what you said?
That,
If it's on the west side of Dawson, it should go on the one on the west.
see Dawson. is
That's
the other
Lewis.
triangle. That's Dawson.
Isn't that Lewis?
Which moves that. Okay, so is there any, do you have,
Doesn't matter. We're not going
I
to
mean,
use
there's the highway is a little more major highway to the
want to go? Do you have a question?
That's
to the
Lewis.
east. So maybe it makes sense to put it into one versus four.
Yeah.
If the highway is a barrier you prefer.
Well, that's
to use.
Lewis Road.
It's Lewis, I think so, yeah.
I was just going to observe, I have other issues with 101, but I understand what you're doing from that standpoint. But like I said, I have other issues, particularly with regard to compactness and
Right.
integrity of community and community of interest. So my view would be not to proceed with doing that with 101, but if three of us think we ought to do it, then by all means.
Yeah.
Oh,
I know I don't prefer that.
well, the
Speaking for
ones
myself.
that we seemed to like, when we got down to the ones we actually liked, didn't have everybody going down across 101. 109 just has 3 districts going across 101. So,
Did you get, so to me, I have some other issues with, are we talking about 101 now? Can you bring that up? Because I have some other issues. I didn't particularly care for the fact that District 3 spilled over into the Mission Oaks area. Was one of my issues with that.
I don't think anybody liked it. As their
Okay, so
primary
do you have enough data tonight?
Is there a consensus that any of the maps could go away at this point?
I think we had talked about 102, 105, 106, and 107, and 108, did we not?
Correct. So
Okay.
of the remaining 7 that we have available,
101.
101 is one.
103 didn't seem to get.
No, yes.
Okay. 104, thoughts?
104 at the peninsula.
We don't like that
like
way
the
it's
peninsula.
divided. Between 1 and 2.
112 didn't seem very popular.
No, that's right.
Sometimes we get just as much from the stuff we don't like.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Oh, Tony,
Looking back at my notes on 111, sorry.
I hadn't, so I had one member, Ms. Santangelo, was lukewarm on 111, 112, I believe.
Yeah,
But
I
if
don't
that's
prefer
just-
111.
If
I
it's
don't
half
either.
of one, then,
Yeah.
you know.
I think 111 was, yeah.
Well, if you're lukewarm, I mean,
I
I'm
would
not trying to place words in your mouth, but
I would have 111 go away.
Yeah, I would too.
I would too.
the remaining members comfortable with that?
Mhm.
Okay. So it looks like we would be moving forward with 109 and 110. This is exactly what I was hoping for in
Is
this
this what you're
process.
Then we're going to be getting more in.
Well, no, you're going to get more maps. You're going to continue the conversation. But if you don't, if you think you
Oh,
can't
that's right.
elect some version
Let me
of
get
some of these
this.
maps, there's no reason to move them forward. But we've got lots of notes about policy conversations that are feeding this. We'll provide a summary in the notes, and then when
Okay.
it's time to pick one, you'll.
Now, also on the agenda does address the sequencing. Do we need to talk about that?
Well, knowing that you're going to get new maps next time, we can. I'm prepared to. So if we pull the sequencing, we did provide a sequencing chart.
I had understood from your earlier comments that you thought that the sequencing discussion should wait until
The very end, typically.
the end,
Yes.
which would be at the next hearing.
That makes some
I'm sorry, I
sense.
thought you wanted to hear from me.
Well,
Well, it was on the agenda.
It
That's
is
why we
worth,
did.
and it would be worth the council's time to take a look, since we're moving forward with 109 and 110. So the rest will be in your packet as not moving forward, but still available for discussion. And we'll rearrange the chart for all the community members if they want, for the online viewer. But certainly getting a familiarization of what's possible. So we recommended, for example, the election sequencing for 109 and 110 in here, and this observes the where each council member lives and their current election sequence as of today. So please look at it and make sure that we didn't put somebody in the wrong year, because where the conversation gets really uncomfortable for councils is when you've got two members with different election dates in the same district, because somebody is going to feel like they lost, or they will, because they'll either not be able to rerun for the by district seat. They may have to
good.
wait 2 years, or get ousted essentially.
It's what happened in Moore Park.
It's happened in many places.
Yeah.
So it's the relationship among the council helps with some of that, and picking maps that doesn't pair council members helps with that.
Well, to get back to my point, though, if there's going to be more maps that come in and we don't know what they're going to look like, Mr. Michler's indicated he's going to be submitting some, and I thought I heard some council members saying that they had possibly heard there might be more maps. Wouldn't it make most sense to have the sequencing discussion with all those
I
maps?
just want to point out that this was in the packet, and we've really narrowed down to 2. So if they just want to be familiar with what's in there, so when we start talking about new maps, hopefully it's less volume of material to try to digest and make important decisions about on the
Right.
spot.
Okay. So,
It's in the board packet.
It's online in the board
Online.
packet.
okay, so now the suggested action, we've done 1 and 2. My understanding, we're going to wait for 3 until a future meeting, and then we're going to confirm the next public meeting for May 22nd, 2019. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would we have to do a motion on that?
It's already said.
I think you've already provided that we've received public comments, you've provided direction on preferred maps. I think on the comments on sequencing, since there's additional maps coming in, I had understood that from the speaker as well as the council that you're going to wait on the sequencing discussion until your next meeting, and confirming that the public hearing is going to be on May 22nd. I don't see any of these as being a motion. It looks like those have all been, all those bases have been touched.
John, do you have a question?
Yeah, for clarification for those watching or who may watch this, if the next hearing, we're going to go through this process again on May 22nd, what is the deadline for those wanting to submit maps for the May 22nd hearing? what is the deadline that they need to get their respective maps in?
Kelly has that if you know.
The deadline is May 9th at 5 p.m.
May 9th at 5 p.m.
Okay,
I just want to emphasize that
9th,
as much
5
as
p.m.
possible.
proceed.
And let me emphasize something else that's in the staff report at the bottom of page A3 and the top of page A4. Further, any change, and I'm reading, quote, further, any changes to a map under consideration for adoption at the May 22 meeting would require republication of any revised map within 7 days prior to adoption of the map and introduction of the ordinance. Thus, and here's the take-home message, changes at the May 22 meeting, if any, would not permit the City Council to follow the currently selected schedule and would require at least one additional meeting of the City Council. And I just think that's important for the
Right.
as a reminder to us and also to the public at large, so they're aware.